How's it going? Welcome to the Fight for Liberty show. We have an awesome show for you guys tonight, so grab a drink, roll a joint, sit back and relax. We're just getting started.
Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to the Fight for Liberty show. It's been a busy week this week. Riots, murders, cookouts, and I joined a new campaign. I'm now the volunteer coordinator for Thomas Quitter, who's running for New York State Senate in the 52nd District. You can check him out at tomfor52.com. That's Tom, FOR52.com. Libertarian presidential candidate Jo Jorgensen made Twitter news this week when she called Tulsi Gabbard, quote, pretty good on one issue. She went on Dave Smith's podcast, Part of the Problem, and I don't know if Dave's lack of brain cells was rubbing off on Jo or if she actually believes this, but she went on about Tulsi being a socialist and the most dangerous and worst Democrat, completely ignoring Tulsi's position on the war on drugs, executive overreach, the debt, corporate subsidies. I could go on, you guys know that. Now, I don't believe Tulsi Gabbard is a libertarian. I actually went on my good friend's show over the weekend to talk about this. However, her fans, as well as the Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and Andrew Yang fans, are warm leads for the LP candidates. They should be working to show their similarities with anti-establishment candidates and working to win over disillusioned and disenfranchised voters from both sides of the aisle. Garrett Johnson did that pretty well, and Jo could build on that, but instead she continues to cut down what could be her allies. One more police killing made national news this weekend as two Atlanta police officers fatally shot Rashard Brooks in a Wendy's parking lot. We see on the video Brooks struggle, pull the officer's taser, attempt to run away. It looks like he might have been trying to fire the taser behind him as he ran, but was unable to do so before Officer Garrett Rolfe shot him multiple times in the back. The officer has been fired, his partner demoted, and even the Atlanta chief of police has resigned. This led to even more protesting, which turned to rioting as a mob set fire to the Wendy's where Brooks was murdered. Rioting around the world hasn't stopped, as dozens of countries are now joining in. We are really able to see our officials for who they are, as New York repeals qualified immunity, but steps up policing on protesters and COVID-19 regulations. Other cities are passing police reform, while in some other cities, mayors and police chiefs are condemning the movement, defending those in uniform who are just doing their job. The city council in Tucson, Arizona, caused quite a disturbance this week when they passed Ordinance 11746, which prohibits a person from entering a crime scene or investigation scene without permission of an officer, and prohibits a person from knowingly obstructing or hindering a police officer or community service officer who is exercising his or her official duties. This went viral, saying that it would make recording police officers illegal, but the ordinance that passed actually stated in Section 1, the public has a right to free speech and to record police activities that take place in public. Now, the police could use Section 2 to say someone was unable to enter an investigation scene to record, and therefore the city council is reviewing the ordinance after immense national backlash. Louisville, Kentucky got in on the action, passing the Breonna Taylor law last week that would make no-knock raids illegal in narcotics cases unless there is imminent threat of harm or death. Now, considering what happened to Breonna in the first place, I'm really not trusting police to be accurate about when there is imminent threat of harm or death. They claim that in almost every police murder. Beyonce even got involved, penning a letter to Kentucky Attorney General demanding that criminal charges be brought against the 3 officers involved in Breonna Taylor's murder. Now, not only did Louisville pass a law in Breonna's honor, but Senator Rand Paul has written and introduced a similar bill called the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. So let's dive into that. S. 3955, a bill to prohibit no-knock warrants, was introduced to the Senate on Thursday, June 11th, and currently has no co-sponsors, according to the Library of Congress. This bill perfectly fits the mold of the One Subject at a Time Act. It's under 2 pages in total, its purpose is clearly defined in the title, and it does nothing besides what it's supposed to do. Now, this is probably because it was written by the One Subject at a Time Act's Senate sponsor, Rand Paul. Yeah, that's right. A Republican is leading the charge on this game-changing criminal justice bill. Now, as always, Section 1 gives us a short title. Section 2 is the rest of the bill. Subsection A starts out with one of my least favorite phrases in law: notwithstanding any other provision of law. This means that this entire subsection has the ability to be voided by other laws. Not the best way to start off a bill, but let's keep going. It continues with, a federal law enforcement officer may not execute a warrant until after the officer provides notice of his or her authority or purpose. This means that they must say who they are, from what agency, and why they are there. Other than that caveat in the beginning, this is a pretty straightforward bill. We're not trying to drastically change law enforcement. We're just trying to prevent one terrible thing from ever happening again. Never again should someone be able to be murdered in their sleep by police officers. Now, you'll notice I specified federal law enforcement, so subsection B covers state and local. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the few areas that autonomy and separation between federal, state, and local governments is actually well enforced. Therefore, the federal government can't really make any rules about policing practices of state and local departments. So, as always, when the government wants to tell somebody to do something they don't have the right to tell them to do, they speak in money. So this subsection says, an agency that receives funds from the Department of Justice during the fiscal year may not execute a warrant that does not require the law enforcement officer serving the warrant to provide notice of his or her authority and purpose before forcefully entering a premises. Now, most police departments receive federal funding, so this could lead to widespread change nationally. And if it doesn't, it would require the federal government to heavily defund state and local police departments, which has been one of the main goals of the protests anyway. So we have 2 caveats here, one in each subsection, but the bill itself is quite strong, significantly better than what was passed in Louisville. No-knock warrants have taken the lives of countless Americans of all races, political affiliations, and walks of life. This is not a left issue. This is not a right issue. This is an American issue. This is about defending the Constitution and limiting the ever-expanding power of law enforcement in our country. Cue bubbles. In tech news, Zoom, the corporation that took over the world during this pandemic, had some bad news for its users. The company says they will no longer be able to offer encrypted calls for users on the free version of their platform. They said this was to better comply with local law enforcement agencies as well as the FBI. Now, this may have sounded like a good reason to them at the time, but this is literally the worst possible thing you could say you were going to do with my calls. The FBI does not need to know what my Bible study is talking about. Now, speaking of police states, over 6 blocks of downtown Seattle has been turned into what they call the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or the CHAZ. This was started by rioters and protesters, mostly from the group Antifa, who were upset about the fascist, racist police state that they lived under. So they built their own smaller fascist, racist police state. It took them less than 2 days to prove to the world that the anti-fascists are the most fascist people in the country. They quickly cracked down on certain crimes while they looted and demanded money from businesses. They forced people into manual labor and they started building walls with strict border control. The worst part is they don't even see the irony. Now, to add to the comedy of the situation, Fox News host Martha McCallum ran a story on her show, The Story, claiming there was infighting within the CHAZ. Her evidence? A Reddit post that quoted the 1975 comedy classic Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It said, "I didn't vote for Roz." Mistaking this comedic line for something serious, much like Fox has done with her journalism career, Martha assumed this was referencing Roz Simone, the unofficial warlord of the CHAZ. Now, as racism is a major theme in America, Donald Trump announced this week that he would restart his campaign trail this coming week. When? Juneteenth. Where? Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, if you're not familiar, this is the date that African Americans celebrate the freedom of the slaves. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was written January 1st, it wasn't able to be enforced in the South for many months. Tulsa is also the location of one of the worst massacres in American history, which we just passed the 99th anniversary of. Which brings me to our new segment, Things You Should Have Learned in High School. One of the many glaring omissions from our history textbooks has been most commonly referred to as the Tulsa Race Riot. This is a wide mischaracterization, as we'll discuss, so I'll call it what it really was, a massacre. On May 30th, 1921, Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old shoeshiner, entered the Drexel building in downtown Tulsa. He had been given permission to use this building's facilities to get water or to use the restroom. Now, no one really knows what happens next, but the 17-year-old elevator operator, Sarah Page, exited the elevator in distress, and Dick was arrested. The next day, the paper ran a story that Rowland had sexually assaulted Page, which caused a mob to descend on the courthouse. Scared for Dick's life, many black neighbors of his from the Greenwood district came armed to the courthouse to protect him. Eventually, a fight broke out, and the much larger white mob overtook the armed counter-protesters. Now riled up, the mob grew and armed themselves as the black community retreated across the railroad tracks to what was known as Black Wall Street. The mob shot their way through Greenwood, looting and burning it to the ground. 2 days later, the National Guard was called in to put an end to the massacre, but it was already over. Over 35 blocks and 1,200 homes were destroyed, and the death toll is now estimated at well over 300. What was once the mecca of black wealth was now ash. In 1997, the city formed a commission to study the massacre, attempting to locate the possible grave sites of the victims. Currently, there are only 2 known graves from the massacre. The other 300-plus bodies are completely unaccounted for. But when the commission decided on 3 possible locations, the city resolved to leave the site alone and let the dead rest. Now, we'll be right back, so don't go anywhere, because the fight has just begun. Fight for Liberty was based on a principle of helping people, so here are a few channels and companies that I care about. So do me a favor and go check them out.
Shut up and sit down.
Welcome back to the Fight for Liberty show. We're going to jump back in by looking into another elected freedom fighter in another edition of What's Up, Washington? When I started doing this segment, it was only a matter of time before I covered the only Libertarian member of Congress, Justin Amash. In April of this year, Justin Amash became the first Libertarian member of the United States House of Representatives. This came shortly before a tease of a presidential run from April to May. This was not the beginning of the man's fight for liberty. He jumped on a lot of people's radar last year when he was outspokenly critical of President Donald Trump and was the only non-Democrat to vote for his impeachment. But Justin Amash had been fighting tyranny for years at that time. He grew up in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, the son of two immigrants. His father was a Palestinian Christian who immigrated to America at 16. His mother was a Syrian Christian who met Justin's father in Damascus and returned to the States with him. Justin graduated as the valedictorian of the Grand Rapids Christian High School in 1998. He then went on to the University of Michigan, where he earned both his Bachelor's of Arts and his Juris Doctorate. He spent a few years in the law field before running for Michigan State House in 2008. As a state legislator, he began his mission of moving our country towards fiscal security and personal liberty. He began using his Twitter, Facebook, and website to report and explain his floor votes. And he had a government transparency page on his website where you could view his staff members and their salaries. He continued this mission through his victory 2 years later when he became Michigan's representative from their 3rd district and moved his operations to Washington. Justin had been outspoken in his dedication to personal freedoms and liberties since the beginning of his political career. He most recently wrote the End Qualified Immunity Act, but he's also been in favor of marijuana legalization and ending foreign wars. He has also been outspokenly against FISA and the Patriot Act and been a loud fiscal conservative and advocate for a more transparent and cohesive style of government. He authored the Readable Legislation Act and supported the One Subject at a Time Act. His dedication to fiscal conservatism actually got him kicked off of the House Budget Committee, along with David Schweigart and Tim Heuselkamp in 2012. Now, if you have ever thought that you didn't have a good name for politics, take David and Tim here. I think you'll be fine. But the names aren't even the funniest part of this story. The Republican Steering Committee removed these 3 congressmen, which hadn't been done in nearly 2 decades, because of their inability to work with other members. These gentlemen did not want to waste our tax dollars, and the Republicans wanted none of that energy in their committee. Even with this tension, Justin was a favorite in the conversation of who would replace retired Senator Carl Levin in 2014. But Justin opted out and continued to represent the people of Michigan's 3rd. After making national news over his criticisms of Donald Trump and fighting a few months of backlash from the Republican Party, Justin left the party on July 8th of 2019 and became the only independent in the House. This also caused him to lose his seat on the Committee on Oversight and Reform because the House rules state that committee membership shall be contingent on continuing membership in the party caucus or conference. Now, how bullshit is that? The duopoly literally controls our federal committees. Side note, we need to fix these systemic problems that strengthen the duopoly and make independent or bipartisan or third-party politics impossible. One impressive detail about Justin Amash is that between January 2011 and 2019, Justin missed only 1 vote out of 5,374. This is an incredible stat considering that most congressmen average less than 50%. He also was quite anti-establishment during presidential elections, endorsing both Ron and Rand Paul in their prospective years, low-key supporting Tulsi Gabbard, and eventually running himself in 2020. Other notable achievements include being named one of Time magazine's 40 under 40 rising stars of U.S. politics just before the general election in 2010. He was also chairman of the Liberty Caucus and was endorsed by Ron Paul in multiple congressional races. He currently lives in Grand Rapids with his son, 2 daughters, and his high school sweetheart. He's been quite persistent that he was committed to the Libertarian Party for the long haul and not just ballot access in a presidential race. I personally am very excited to see what he will do for the Libertarian Party and how he can grow the liberty movement in the next 4 years. I really, really, really hope he runs again in 24, maybe with some backup in Congress. Thank you guys so much for watching, and tune in next week to ask, what's up, Washington? It's great to be able to do that segment about an elected libertarian, but we need more. I spoke earlier about Tom Quitter's campaign, but there are so many more. I've spoken about and had on the show Dwayne Whitmer, Michael Madrid, and Tucker Coburn, but that's just part of New York State. I know plenty of you live in Colorado, in Texas, New Hampshire, and some even outside of the country. There are libertarian candidates for you. If you don't know the website of your state party, go to lp.org and look it up. Most state websites have a list of all the libertarian candidates in your state this year. Give a couple bucks, sign up to Phone Bank or Knock Doors, or maybe just share the link to the campaign website all over social media. While you're at it, throw me a couple bucks. You can do that at patreon.com/fightforliberty. We have to be a team out there if we want to win. Trust me, I know how cliche that sounded. Some people out there are taking matters into their own hands, and they've sprung to action the last couple weeks around the country, toppling statues and monuments of slave owners, slave traders, and leaders of the Confederacy. Some say this is long overdue, and we need to stop celebrating racism in this country. Others are horrified and claiming that this is going to destroy history. To those people, I say, don't cling so tightly to your participation trophies, you snowflakes. For a party that loves reminding people that they freed the slaves while the Democrats started the KKK, all true, of course, they sure do fight hard for their Confederate heritage. As we wrap up here this week, I want to watch a clip with you from Dave Chappelle's new special. Netflix released just under half an hour of his show on YouTube titled 846.
And I want to shout out all the young people who have had the courage to go out and do all this amazing work protesting. I am very proud of you. You kids are excellent drivers. I am comfortable in the back seat of the car. So carry on, young ones. It's hard to figure out what to say about George Floyd, so I'm not going to say it yet. I'll say something. Are you guys having a good time, or is this weird? I gotta tell you, this is actually like the first concert in North America since all this shit happened. So, like it or not, it's history. It's gonna be in the books. At least we tried. There's other comedians who would, well, this is not the first show, but the other shows were like in drive-ins, and if people liked the niggas' jokes, they honk the horn. Didn't sound like any fun at all, did it? So what's you guys? You a black and white friend hanging out? Do you guys know each other? It's gonna be a quiet car ride home, isn't it? That's good. I'm just kidding. Enjoy your riots. I'm just kidding. They're not really even riots. Have you noticed that? It's a fucking weird time. In like 1993, I'm not sure what year it was, but I was in LA. I had smoked a joint, and I was watching the movie Apocalypse Now. It was like just after 4 o'clock in the morning. And what later would become known, the Northridge earthquake happened. It felt like it started in my apartment. I'm from east of the Mississippi. On this side, we don't know what earthquakes are about. I gotta tell you something, man. Excuse me for burping. This shit was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. A lot of things went through my mind. I was like, not naked, but you know what I mean, just chilling in my boxes. I put my clothes on. I found my weed and a pipe and a lighter and some money and my keys. All these things while the earthquake is happening. While I'm experiencing what an earthquake is the first time, and I was certain that I might very possibly die. As a matter of fact, I remember I made a point not to scream, just in case I lived, I wouldn't have to remember myself being vocally terrified. But I forgave myself for being terrified. That earthquake couldn't have been more than 35 seconds. This man kneeled on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Can you imagine that? This kid thought he was gonna die. He knew he was gonna die. He called for his mother. He called for his dead mother. I've only seen that once before in my life. My father, on his deathbed, called for his grandmother. When I watched that tape, I understood this man knew he was gonna die. People watched it. People filmed it. And for some reason that I still don't understand, all these fucking police had their hands in their pockets. Who are you talking to? What are you signifying? That you can kneel on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and feel like you wouldn't get the wrath of God. That's what is happening right now. It's not for a single cop, it's for all of it. Fucking all of it. I don't mean to get heavy, but we gotta say something.
You know, sometimes I get so caught up in the mission that I forget to really take in what's going on. We chant, "I can't breathe," but we don't have a clue what that actually feels like. This is insane what is happening to our people out there. These are human lives in the balance. Breonna Taylor could be you. We know it doesn't matter what you do, who you are, how you react, where you are. You can be asleep and innocent, and the cops will still kill you. You can be asleep in your car. You can just be driving home from work. It doesn't matter. As much as I make this about policy and politics, it's really about human lives. I'm glad the country seems to be waking up to that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Mondays on Patreon, Wednesdays on YouTube. Until then, keep up the fight.